Making materials into something they weren't before, into something new, is what makes crafting a delight. The making itself, slowing down to create something with your hands, the textures, colors, and techniques, that's what makes creating so satisfying. From these gorgeous materials of wool roving, yarn, and felt, we are going to create this hoop art heart collection: a felted wool heart, a French knot yarn heart, and an appliqué wool heart. I'll give you all the how-tos, but if you'd rather have a bit of a rest and watch and just enjoy seeing it all come together, that is perfect. There's no pressure to make anything today, just an opportunity to slow down and watch some pretty hoop hearts be created. When you're ready to slow craft along, you can come back anytime. Here's the shape we'll use for each of the hearts. I drew a few of them until I happened upon the shape I wanted, and then went ahead and traced the heart onto all three of the pieces of fabric. I used a light box, but if you don't have a light box, you can hold the shape up against a window and then put the fabric over it and trace it that way as well. The finished hoops are about 4.5 inches, so I made the squares about 9 inches to make sure that I could fit them into my favorite hoop that I like to stitch in. So this is the one we'll start with, the French knot yarn heart. I have made these little hearts before using embroidery floss. For both of them, I selected 3 different shades of floss, and I alternated single French knots and double French knots for the added texture. And I have another one ready to go here. And I have my 3 embroidery flosses ready to use as well. I love these little hoops because they are so sweet in and amongst the bigger hoops. For this one, we'll be using yarn instead of embroidery floss. Really, the biggest difference is it's just a little bit harder to pull through the fabric because the yarn is thicker than embroidery floss. And here's what we need: just the yarn, the scissors, a needle with an eye that's big enough for the yarn to fit through it, so I do like a needle threader. And I used the tracing pen that disappears with heat. I like to start by making a running stitch all around the shape of the heart. This just gives a nice border to make the French knots inside. And I did end up changing from my wooden hoop to my plastic hoop. I find it holds the fabric in place much better, much tighter, so it makes it a lot easier to work with. And once the running stitch is done, just taking it out of the hoop and ironing out the blue pen. So we'll make our first French knot by pulling the yarn all the way through. Then we'll wrap the yarn around the needle and go back into the fabric very, very close, but not into the hole that you came up through. You want to really hold this yarn that I'm holding there with my left hand. That is the secret to a good, non-tangly French knot. Holding that yarn that I'm holding with my left hand all the way until you pull the yarn all the way through. And there's your first French knot. I like to just kind of keep my hoop as tight as I can. It just makes working with it a lot easier. So I'm going to make the next French knot here. And again, we'll wrap the needle once and go back down into the fabric very, very close to where we came up. We will hold that yarn tightly until we pull the yarn all the way through. And that's what makes a good French knot. Again, around the needle, back down into the fabric. And you can see I'm really holding on to that left side of the yarn. That's the key. Again, just holding right onto that left side, making sure that the left side of the yarn is really tight before you pull through. And then I just go around and scatter the French knots. Some people might be a little bit more precise and organized than I am, but I just kind of randomly go all around within the boundary of the heart. For the embroidery floss ones that I did, like I said, I did some single and some double French knots where you go around the needle with the thread twice. But with this yarn French knot hoop, I'm only using single French knots. I'm just kind of holding it up to the light to see, and I think I filled it all in. So there's our beautiful French knot heart. Now we'll start with our needle felted heart. These are the supplies that we can use. We've got some wool roving, our felting pad. You may want to protect your finger and thumb with these protectors. And then whatever felting needle you have on hand. Again, we're going to do a running stitch to act as the border for the heart. So I selected that embroidery floss, just using the usual 6 strands. And I'm going around and doing the running stitch around the entire heart, just like we did for the French knot heart. And for this project, I do like to hold my fabric in the hoop backwards so that the fabric lays right up against the felting pad. I'm just starting to pull wool roving. I like to pull the wisps apart so that when I felt them onto the fabric, they don't look sort of stringy, but really nice and loose. Certain wool roving is a little tighter than others. And then it's just placing the wool roving within your running stitch heart boundary and felting it into the fabric until you're really happy with the colors and the thickness. With this one, I was trying to include the colors that would be in the other 2 hoops. And then I found that I liked having some dark in one area and some lighter in another area. And it's really fun just to keep working on it until it looks exactly the way you want the heart to look. So you'll just keep felting it, and as you're going along, you'll see that little parts of it will be looser, little parts of it will be a little thinner. So you just keep adding wool and felting it in until it is your desired texture. The embroidered running stitch does really sort of help you to keep it in the border. You can put the needle right up against the border and use it to help you tuck in all of the little bits of wool. So here we have our completed felted wool heart. And now we'll move on to our next one, which is a piece of wool felt made into a heart. So just trace the shape onto the non-shiny side of a piece of freezer paper, cut it out loosely, then iron it on to the piece of felt. We'll cut it out. It doesn't matter which side of the felt you iron this onto. Because you're just going to take the paper off anyway. I do like to use pins and pin my heart down just to hold it in place while I'm stitching. I used 2 strands of embroidery floss in a color that I thought would complement but not match exactly. I did want the stitch to show up just a little bit. And then I'm going to be doing applique whip stitch here. You pull the needle through, and then when you go back down on the edge of the wool, you want to make sure that the needle is perpendicular to the fabric so that you're not cutting into the edges of the wool. Then you want to just try to keep your stitches as even as you can all around the edge of the heart. When I got to the point where I had about an inch and a half left to stitch, I stuffed a little bit of fiber fill into the heart. I liked the puffiness that it created. I thought it added a little bit of texture and interest. Then after adding the fiber fill, just continuing your applique whip stitch the rest of the way to close up the rest of the heart. And there's our third heart, our felt heart. I like to treat my wooden hoops as if they are frames, so usually I paint them. Sometimes I use the paint directly from the bottle, but more often I enjoy doing a little bit of color mixing to get exactly the color that I'm going for. It's one of the things I really enjoy doing to finish off my hoop. When I'm done with my hoop and the frame has been painted, I put the project in all the way. Of course, sometimes it can take a little bit to get it lined up just right. And then I tighten it as much as I possibly can. Then I cut the excess fabric about a couple of inches outside of the frame or the hoop. So then we'll do the last step of the process, which is to stitch the back of the fabric in a circle and gather it up so that the hoop lays nice and flat against the wall and it's just really nice and tidy and finished. I do a very long piece of thread and thread a needle and make these running stitches essentially around the entire outside. What it's going to do once the stitch is done around the entire circle is you'll be able to pull the thread and gather the fabric so that it closes up and covers the back of the hoop. I do actually like to close mine up and then I go around a second time just to continue to tighten it up really nicely so that when I put it on the wall, it lays flat. So here are our beautiful little hoop art hearts. I hope you've enjoyed watching them come together. Thank you for being here.